Hey everybody, Dan here. I am so excited to bring you this episode. It's a special Christmas edition of the Meaning Movement podcast with my amazing co-host, Raj Lulla. Let's just go ahead and get right into it. Welcome to the Meaning Movement podcast. We know you want to build a stress-free life and business that gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. In order to do that, you have to eliminate the conflict between your work and the rest of your life. But the problem is running a business is hard and requires sacrifice and commitment, leaving you feeling depleted, exhausted, and even burned out. But we believe that every entrepreneur deserves to recapture the motivation and energy they need to run their business. And that is what this show is all about. I'm your host, Dan Cumberland. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening, and let's go. Raj, welcome to this very special Christmas edition episode of the Meaning Movement podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. All that.
Yes. I had this on my calendar as Raj and Dan's Christmas carols, and my wife said, "Are you and Raj going Christmas caroling?" Which I had to disappoint her and say that was not in the plans for today.
I would do it. If I were in Seattle with you, I would do it.
Well, let's just just jump right into the topic at hand. Why are we here? Oh, and what does it have to do with caroling?
Well, other than my passing resemblance to Indian Santa Claus,
you could actually pull it off pretty well.
Yes. I think my kids are convinced Santa is brown, but I'm
in favor.
The real reason that I'm here on the Christmas episode is I saw a post the other day that talked about how we've been reading A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens wrong for too long. And, it's one of my favorite books. I try to read it every year at Christmas. And then also A Muppet Christmas Carol is like one of my favorite, probably my favorite Christmas movie of all time. Yes. And it is one of the most faithful adaptations of the book, believe it or not, even with Muppets in it. And so I was very interested in this post where this gal said that we'd been reading it wrong because we tend to think of Scrooge like the megalomaniac billionaire. So your Musks of the world, your Bezoses of the world, and that we see him as just filthy rich and uncaring towards other people. And while it is true that Scrooge is wealthy, he doesn't act like the billionaire type that we kind of have in our minds. Yep. In fact, he's very miserly in the story. He lives in a cold, dark house by himself, and so he doesn't really spend lavishly. In fact, he does quite the opposite. He's very miserly, very spendthrift. And so what the poster suggested was that Scrooge was actually living out his trauma, that he was poor as a boy because of the decisions and actions of his father. And this is similar to Dickens' own story. And so what he was really doing is he was trying to avoid the same fate of that his family grew up in. I believe his sister had died, because of the conditions, and again because of her father, and so he's trying to avoid that. But in doing so, he became more or less what he didn't want. He was alone. He had money, but he didn't spend it to the betterment of other people in his life, and so then he kind of became this, or at least he lived in the same kind of conditions as a wealthy man that he did as a poor man. So Scrooge's redemption in A Christmas Carol isn't so much that he went from being a rich person who spent all of his money on himself. It's more that he went from living out his trauma, being a hoarder of money, to caring about other people in the same way that he wasn't cared for as a young man, as a boy. And so I brought this idea to you because it reminds me of something that you say a lot, which you ask people the question, do you have more control over your past, present, or future? And almost everyone says present or future. And you make the argument that you actually have the most control over your past. This was the
Yes.
first time I've ever heard this. It was when you told it to me. It was helpful to me to hear you say it. So I'd love if we just started there
I
and
love
talk
it.
about what do you mean when you say that?
I love it. Such a great setup, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the Muppets Christmas Carol. I was going to ask you which rendition of the Christmas Carol was your favorite. Mine is also the Muppets Christmas Carol. So, shout out to the Muppets. We're on good common ground there. So yeah, let me just kind of talk about this idea of past, present, future. We think of time being linear, flowing in that order: past, present, future. And usually when I'm kind of talking about this idea, it's getting us thinking about how do we create the future that we want, and where is the starting point of that conversation? Where do we have
Yeah.
the most ability to produce change? And my theory, my thesis, I guess you could say, is that the past is where we should focus our efforts, at least to start. And the reason being is that, as you know, you know well, as someone who studies story and works with story professionally, um, humans are story making machines, meaning making machines. That means that anytime we encounter facts, we try to find some sort of narrative to weave those facts together. The facts that fit in that narrative end up being the ones that stick. The ones that don't fit in that narrative end up being the ones that drop to the wayside. I think this is kind of a I don't know, it's a realization I had at 3 a.m. the other night of like, um, laying awake, wishing I was asleep, and thinking about why do we gravitate towards story so much? Why is story so important? And the realization I had is that, like, what story does for us is it shows us how our brains work naturally.
Mm,
And a
yeah.
story is an author or director or writer has done for us in a very consolidated, concentrated way what our brains are always doing, which is picking and choosing the bits and pieces and focusing on them in a certain way to lead us down a path towards some sort of conclusion, hopefully, redemptive. In the end. And so all of that to say, just to come full circle back to why I say the past is where you have so much power and so much ability to make change, is that we can't change the facts, but the facts are not a story. And what we can change about our past is the story that we tell about the facts that have taken place in our lives. So the better we understand the facts themselves to begin with, and the meaning that we assign to those facts, the more we can change the way we view ourselves, the way we understand the reality that we live in, the place that we are in the world, the things that we're trying to accomplish. And then it's really through that lens, through the lens of the past, the story that we tell ourselves about our past, through that lens that we look into the future to see what's possible for us. Based on that future of possibility is how we decide and choose to act in the present. So that's where I always like to say, like, time doesn't go past, present, future. It goes past, future, present. And in order to change the present, we should start on the past to change our future, and then change how we live in the present in order to move towards that future.
That's so great. I like how you talked about how we can't change the facts, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is, there's people who have had things happen to them in the past that they would say, I had absolutely zero control over that.
Yes.
And so it's almost insulting to those people to hear like, oh, you have control over your past.
Yep.
But you're not talking about changing what happened.
Correct.
You're talking about changing the story that we tell ourselves
Yes.
about
I have
what happened.
a great. This is just from, like, this is fresh for me, and I'm a big fan of speak your truth while it's fresh. Two
Yeah.
nights ago, I like blew up at my 4-year-old daughter over something stupid and yelled at her, and my wife like got in between me and her. Was like, Dan, this is not who you are. This is not how we parent. And I had to like take a breather, walk to the other room. Not my finest, one of my worst, honestly, parenting moments. And my daughter was, quickly was over it, but I was not over it. Partly what happened, but mostly my reaction in that moment. And I was just beating myself up about it. Was like felt really discouraged, really down all evening, and then even had a hard time sleeping. Again, reoccurring theme here. Dan doesn't sleep well. But again, at like 2, 3 a.m., thinking about the events that had happened, and I realized that this thing was happening in my mind that I wasn't even aware of, that I was telling myself this story, that the event that happened, which was this big blow up at my daughter, was a part of this trajectory of story of me being a bad dad, or me being a dad who has anger problems, or me, a dad that yells too much, or whatever it might be. And then I realized that, like, I kind of at that moment, I'm at a fork in the road where that could be the story that I tell about that event. Or I could tell the story of like that I'm a good dad and I made a mistake and learned from that mistake and got better because of that event. Um, and I know that sounds like simple, like saying it like this, but for me, it was like it was just so almost like an out of body experience to in the moment realize like I'm at this fork in the road and I can choose what I do with the event that just happened to me.
Yeah.
And the same is true to more traumatic, more violent, more damaging things in our past. Like we can choose to be a victim, to say that this was the start of our deterioration into whatever level of powerlessness that resulted from it, or we can choose to say this is a moment in our story that's really dark, at which we began to take back some of that power and choose to not be defined by the events that took place. And so I'm not here to minimize trauma, and I think capital T trauma is definitely something that if anyone listening, watching has experienced, like you should get professional help with that. But also know that because it happened doesn't mean that it doesn't mean to need to define who you are, and that by engaging with it, especially if it's capital T trauma with a therapist, you can begin to find new meaning in those really hard, really scary, really damaging moments.
Yeah. Yeah. I've worked with a lot of nonprofits, and some that focus on abuse and even human trafficking. And one of the things that they do pretty much in common across the board is they shift from victim language to survivor language,
Yes.
those types of words, because the victim language keeps people defined by the trauma, but
Mm.
survivor language keeps people defined by their strength and their characteristics
Mm.
that keep them going every day.
Yes.
What's interesting, though, that kind of popped to mind as you were saying that, is that sometimes it's also important to tell the story accurately. I think about how alcoholics need to say, I'm an alcoholic,
Yep.
in order to move forward, because the story that they have been telling is that that it's not a problem, that I can quit whenever I want to, that that it was just that occasion and that circumstance or whatever, and if it weren't for those things, that then I wouldn't, I don't really have a problem. It's just a series of events strung together.
Yeah.
And admitting that you have a problem is actually a different way of telling the story, of saying,
Yes.
look, this is, for whatever reason, genetic, whatever, is part of my identity that I have to deal with. And it doesn't have to be the only thing about me. It doesn't have to be even the most important thing about me, but it is something that I have to tell that story accurately in order
Yes.
to have the future that I want, to make the changes right now that I need to. Because if I don't, then I am too open to, or I'm too vulnerable to falling back into that pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. And repeating the pattern, just like Scrooge
Yeah.
in the Christmas Carol.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about that. He's got so many opportunities throughout the book. If you've never read it, for anybody who's listening, I highly recommend. The movies are great, but it's also, the language in the book is so great. If you're not much of a reader, I highly recommend Patrick Stewart's audiobook version of it. He's
Oh,
such a great
nice.
performer, and he even will do some sound effects throughout, and it's
I'm gonna
fantastic.
check that out. That sounds really fun.
especially if you're nerdy enough to have grown up like on Star Trek like me. So
Yes. Yes, I am.
it just a lot of like nerd pathways converging there. So, but yeah, I highly recommend listening to it, reading it, because it's more than just the moments that you see with the ghosts in the book. You have or in the movies, you have these moments where, Scrooge has an opportunity for love, for allowing people into his heart. I'm so thankful that Disney is restoring the version of the movie where he actually does have a love interest, and there's a really moving song that
Mm,
that happens between them. And they took it out because they thought it made kids cry too much, and it does, but it's important. It's one of those life things that needs to happen. And but he's got all these moments where he can turn another direction,
mm.
and he doesn't. And that can lead to, I think, in his mind, kind of a perception sort of that he's never really been loved, that he never really had the opportunity for a different future. And that's where the ghosts come in.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, okay, that ghost of Christmas past,
Yes.
and the things that the ghost shows him. Why do you think, yeah, like, why do you think that is so powerful? What do you think about maybe even any of the particular moments that the ghost shows Scrooge that kind of stand out to you as
Yeah, it's
significant?
such a good question. I wish that I had, before this recording, like revisited, because it's been a year or two since I've watched I've watched or read the book. Broadly, what I want to say about what's happening in those moments is that very healthy process that we're talking about here, of like looking back and saying, what are the events? And what stands out to me of the story is the way that Scrooge, I feel like, was able to confront for the first time some of the feelings of, like, for himself,
Yeah.
for the who he was in those moments, and parts of himself that he hadn't um, allowed himself to feel. The
Yeah.
grief, the loss, all of those ideas, and that's a big part of what was happening in those moments in the story. But since it's more fresh with you, tell me more what you saw in those moments.
Yeah. When the ghost of Christmas past takes Scrooge into the past, it's interesting because most of what the ghost shows Scrooge is actually joyful moments.
Mm,
It's being at school,
yes.
and having a lot of promise, and then again having a love interest in his life, and then also Fezziwig's party, or Fozziwig if you are a
Yes.
Muppet truist, as I am. um, and and I think that that's really powerful because it's such a juxtaposition from who Scrooge has become. And
Mm,
I think anybody who's ever made any major changes in their life, you have to have those moments where you realize that, for one, it wasn't always this way.
yep.
And for another, it doesn't always have to be this way.
Yes.
I know for me, like my personal journey with health, there are times where it's like, look, it doesn't matter if I eat cookies or if I exercise, it's just going to be a struggle my whole life. So
Yes.
so cookies it is, it's like
Yeah.
cookies feel good, exercise doesn't. Exercise does feel good, and again, that's kind of even a rewriting things too. It's like,
Uh-huh.
that the exercise doesn't feel good. And it's like, well, actually, you get a heck of a lot of endorphins from the exercise,
Yes.
but you also get some muscle ache, and
Yes.
so but with cookies you can get a tummy ache. So it's you have those trade-offs, but you
Choose
pick
your
what part
pain.
of the story to tell yourself. Yeah. So he's got those moments, and he gets to see himself having joy in those
Mm,
moments.
hmm.
And it seems to me that in the world that he lives now, it's like his business partner has died, and
Hmm.
that's like one of the first words of the book. Marley was dead to
Marley
begin
was
with.
dead. I love
Yeah.
it.
and
Such a good
and
start.
so he lives in the dark. He no longer has a business partner. It's the streets of London and coal dust, and kind of all of that. It's very bleak at the beginning of the story, and it's
Hmm.
easy to think it's always been that way. but
Yes.
it actually wasn't. He had teachers who cared about him. He had a great boss who he thought was sort of foolishly generous, but
Mm.
as it turns out, was actually kind of more of a model for what he should be. He had a love interest who cared about him sort of despite his trauma that he was bringing into the relationship. She wanted to get married. She was on board, and he kept putting it off. He, well, wait till we have more money. Wait till we have more
Yeah.
money. And it was all from a very noble place in a way. He didn't want to raise a family the way that his father had raised a family. And he didn't want to like bring a wife and children into what he kind of saw as his disaster, his mess. And so it was from an honorable place. It just,
Mhm.
he just didn't realize, he didn't pay attention to the fact that he would be stronger with her.
Yeah.
He would make better decisions with her, and that she was along for the ride, that she wasn't
Mhm.
tricked into any of this. Like she was, she was strong and independent. And we know that because she walked away from the relationship.
Mm.
And so it's not like, just a victim of the times, the way that, people had to get married for economic survival back then. She walked away from probably her best shot at economic survival
Yeah.
because she valued herself as much as Scrooge should have valued himself. So that's what I see in those moments, is that, we tend to look back on our past a lot of times with shame, and we
Mm.
go, ugh, I shouldn't have been that way.
Yeah.
And so we kind of see all those moments. And I will say too, the ghost shows him in each of those moments. They're all kind of tinged with this sadness. They're
Mhm.
mostly joyful, but they're kind of tinged with this.
Exactly.
He was happy at school, but then there was also that time that his sister asked him to come home because dad is different now, and he didn't believe her, kind of, maybe perhaps rightly.
Mm.
And then that was the last time he saw her, I think. And then, his fiance left him, and Fezziwig, was no longer part of his life, and he kind of missed out on these opportunities. And so he saw how they were tinged with sadness, but instead of looking back on them with shame, I think the real lesson he took away was he was capable of joy, that he was
Yes.
capable of love, and that part of him is still there.
We'll get right back to our conversation, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. This episode in this season of the podcast is brought to you by 923.co, a web and mobile app development team that I have been working directly with for more than a year, building VideoSnap. VideoSnap.io, if you don't know, is the software that I built to repurpose long-form speech-based content, like this podcast, into short-form, viral-ready videos. Think TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Reels, etc. If you're making content and you want to be found in the algorithms, you should be using VideoSnap. I've been building directly with 923, and they are a phenomenal team with a strong track record of building high quality apps. They've built more than 50 apps. Those apps have gone on to do more than $1 billion for their clients, which is incredible. I'm also now contributing to their team in a product strategy role, which means if you have a dream that you want to realize with software, not only should you talk to 923 because they are so good at software, but I could help you directly build that with them. Go to 923.co, all spelled out, 9NINETWOTHREE.co, and find out more. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. And I think, and also like seeing that sadness as an invitation to, rather than say, well, that was that, but making my money and being, Scrooge as we know him is more important and better. Like to feel that sadness of, oh, that was really good, and I missed that, and that was
Yeah.
really beautiful and joyful, and all of those things. And there is loss in like the choice that he's made to put that aside and then become who he is, today. And
Yeah.
by engaging, I think, in that loss, then is the invitation for him to then re-engage in his future and maybe bring some of that past into his future, the future that he's making.
Yeah. And, you and I have talked a lot. It's been a hard year for us,
Yes.
for me personally. And
for me, I wanted to talk about
Yeah.
this because I feel like this is so relevant to like where you and I both have been with our businesses and many other entrepreneurs, right? Like 2020, 2021, 2022, people listening are like, yeah, it has been a dumpster fire for years now. Help.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. you and I last week we kind of went through my entire year, personally and
Yep.
professionally, but focusing mostly on work. And at the end of it, I was feeling this kind of grief, and it was interesting because I've been in counseling for several years now, and this is not even my first go in counseling, and so it was a little disheartening because it was like I thought I had dealt with this,
Yeah.
and
Right.
so then you and I unpacked it a little bit, and um, I found this like false correlation that I had created about something that had happened, and then the things that happened after that. It seemed causal.
Mm.
It seemed like this happened, and so everything happened
Yes.
afterwards as a result of that. But what really it was that this thing happened, these other things were going to happen anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And because I made a decision to have, sort of short temporary pain in that moment, and it was painful, it was really
Mm-hmm.
painful, um, it prevented a lot of other pain that could have happened for the rest of the year at a grander scale, more
Yes.
advanced and longer term. And so it doesn't change the fact that a very, very hard, very hurtful thing happened this year.
Yep.
But what it did do is it allowed me to kind of take it out, examine it, and say, "Wow, I didn't even realize that." Like you said, how I was thinking about it, that I had this
Mm-hmm.
weird connection in my brain that was not wired correctly.
Yes.
Objectively, it was the right thing to do, even though it was hard.
Yes.
And then I had to make these decisions going forward, and they weren't causal. They were corollary. It means they happened, and they all happened, but it didn't happen because of that thing. And
Yes.
that was it was hard, but it was powerful to be able
Mm.
to look back at that and say, I don't have to carry that anymore. I don't have to feel
Yeah.
like I don't have to worry if I made the right decision, because there's actually a lot of data to say I made the right decision.
I love hearing that, because I've been curious where you've gone with that since we did that exercise. And that exercise, for anyone listening, is the first. Well, it's two things I want to invite people to. Um, if you're listening in real time, well, actually anytime, just go to themeaningmovement.com/annual review. Just do annual. I'll put a dash in there, annual dash review, and you can download an exercise where it walks you through this process, which Raj and I did, which also is a part of the first movement of the accelerator that I'm launching at the beginning of 2023, where we're getting to do this kind of work together. Because again, one of my theses in life is that business is human, and as
Mhm.
humans in business, and all the things that happen, like, we still carry them. They reside in us. They take space. They take up space in us, and if we don't acknowledge them, work with them, find the story, and maybe even rewrite some of that story, then they have control and power over us. And so part of the process, especially in the accelerator, what I'm doing with this group of people, is doing exactly that. Like, what are these moments? What are these moments that are, both good, both bad, and what are they? What's the story that we're telling about them? And I love, from what you shared there, is it sounds like there was this moment that was really painful, and you recognized it, much of the pain in it, but it sounds like through that reflection piece came to see, like, okay, there actually is something to be proud of here, that you made a hard call,
Yeah.
and it was a good call, and yes, it was painful, yes, it was, it hurt, but it was the right decision. And I hope in that you feel some pride, welling up in you, that, like, it's not just like, yeah, things were hard, and that was, a really defeating year, but also, like, yeah, actually you overcame a lot, and, like, there's a great story that's emerging here.
And a lot of it was to protect other people too,
Yeah.
and so it's an opportunity to see that even though sometimes we have to make choices or things happen to us that we don't have control over, or don't like, that I was able to identify that I was actually very much living in alignment with my values. And sometimes
Yes.
your values conflict. Sometimes the thing that you want to do to restore a relationship, or keep things moving forward, is just not possible because you need to protect other people, or
Mm.
even sometimes that you just as simply as you need to be able to continue to provide for your family, and you have to leave a certain situation or end a certain
Yes.
situation
Yes.
because there is a higher value that you have to live up to. And
Yes.
that is not something to carry shame into. It's something you can be proud of,
Mm,
and know that you're living up to the person that you want to be. And honestly, even if you make the wrong decision, just having the moment to say, okay, now I know what I don't want to do.
yeah.
And that's powerful too, because none of us get to do this twice.
Yeah.
Like, it's not
Totally.
like the should have known better thing. I think that's a thing that I have struggled with my entire life, and I'm now
Hmm.
figuring out that there is no such thing. That
Yes.
for the most part, every experience that you are going into, you're experiencing for the first time. You've never experienced anything like it, and you can only draw on things that are similar in your past to go, okay, I think this is what I want to do here. But the
Mm,
more and higher stakes situations that you find yourself in, sometimes you're going to get it right and you go, yes, that was in accordance to my values. But sometimes you're going to get it wrong and say, okay, I never want to do it this way ever again. And that is going to help
yes.
make you who you want to be.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, and some of us just have to learn. I don't know. This is probably a story I need to rewrite for myself. Even as I'm saying it, like I feel like some speaking for myself, some of us just have to learn the hard way. I feel like there's so many things that I'm like, yeah, I couldn't have known better because I have to. Even if I had known better, like even if I knew in theory what I know now, if I didn't know it in lived experience, there's no way that I would have made a different choice.
You know, I would maybe even push that a little further and say most of us, or maybe even all of us, have to learn the hard way. If you think
Yeah.
about stories, the stories that we all really find interesting, I'll go back to to Star Trek here. I don't even know why, but the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies that came out in the late 2000s. There's this kind of recurring motif that J.J. Abrams does with Captain Kirk, where he has him end up hanging off of a cliff or a bulkhead or something like that at many times
Uh-huh.
during the movie. And one of the things that was great about his version of these movies was that Captain Kirk is not invincible.
Yeah.
That he frequently finds himself in life and death situations, often because of his own idiocy.
Yes.
And and frankly, his story is more exciting. His story is far
Yeah.
more exciting than, like, we don't make movies about the cadet whose dad was in Starfleet and showed him the exact path, and he found the right branch of science to study the exact first time, and met a nice girl while at the academy, and they settled down and had kids. And like, nobody makes that movie because it's boring,
It's
and also,
boring.
frankly, unrelatable, because who
Yes.
actually gets all of those things right on the first try? And and so it's like, yeah, I would make the argument that anybody who's living a story that's halfway decent is making a lot of mistakes, because
Yeah.
they're experiencing new situations that they've never experienced before.
Mm.
And that means they're growing, that means they're changing, that they are expanding their horizons into things that are more and better and interesting. And
Yeah.
instead of just living out a playbook that was written for them by being like generationally wealthy or whatever, like,
Yes. Yes.
that just set them up for a very successful but boring life.
Yes. I love that. I love that. Well, and maybe even just to kind of bring this full circle all the way back to um I'm going to say Uncle Scrooge. It's not Uncle Scrooge, but Scrooge. Um
You're thinking that because of Disney, like
I
because
know.
of
I know. Exactly. And I
because
imagine
of
that's
the
where
ducks.
Uncle Scrooge came from, right?
Yeah.
Like
Oh, it is.
probably
Yeah,
he was a
Scrooge
character
McDuck.
in this story and then he's
Yeah.
stuck. But coming back to Scrooge, Uncle or otherwise, I don't know, just something that as your time that kind of jumped out to me is like that another reason that I feel like this conversation and really spending more time with the Christmas Carol story is so fitting for the meaning movement is how much Scrooge's personal stuff was affecting his business. Like the
Yeah.
story starts as a story about a businessman, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then it's like it goes into his personal stuff, but like again, I just am endlessly fascinated by how much culture tries to separate, and business is business and personal is personal, and I'm always like, it's always personal, and it's
Yeah.
always for me, it's also always business, but I don't know. I feel like there's more there that we need to speak
Yeah.
to.
Well, so I think that takes us to the Ghost of Christmas Present. I know you like to go
Yeah.
past future present, but the Ghost of Christmas Present is, again, especially in the Muppet version, takes him to Bob Cratchit's house, takes him to
Mm-hmm.
his nephew's house. People that,
Mm-hmm.
his nephew you see at his business earlier in the movie. And then, and he kind of blows off his nephew and his invitation to the Christmas party and tells him that people
Yes.
who celebrate Christmas are foolish. And then he gets to see what happens when he's not there, and
Mm.
he's the butt of a party joke. And his nephew kind of reconciles the situation, tries to not have his uncle too terribly dragged through the mud, but at the same time he also recognizes that, I mean, what you're saying is true, and he
Yeah.
can't even really defend him. And then he sees Bob Cratchit, and he sees Tiny Tim's, suffering, and that's apparently preventable with the right amount of treatment.
Mm.
And so I think that kind of one thing inside that is that in work we can get really tripped up in like our own story and not realize what's happening with people around us, and
Yeah.
whether that be our coworkers, our clients, whatever. Whereas I would argue that a lot of those times, if we put ourselves in the shoes of people who are on the other side of the table for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
then we'd probably either make better decisions, or the decisions that we make, we'd make more compassionately, more aligned with
Yeah.
our values, whatever it be. That we would, it just gives us perspective. That's really
Yes.
kind of what it comes down to, is that Ghost of Christmas Present was about perspective. It didn't
Mm.
show Scrooge his life now. Scrooge knows what his life is now. It showed
Yes.
Scrooge what everybody else's life who he touches is
Mm.
now.
Mm. So good. So good. And that's where the meaning comes from, right? That's
Yeah.
why, like, that's why we do this. That's why we're, mission driven entrepreneurs. We're not in it just to sit and count our coins like Scrooge and balance our ledgers, but to like impact people. And so um yeah, I feel like that's the perfect place to take, even though I do feel like Dickens should have put the present at the end, but I'll
Well, he
I'll let it
does.
I'll
That's a
let it
funny
go.
thing. He comes back to it, because then Scrooge sees the Ghost of Christmas Future, and he
Mm.
does that thing where
Yep.
he it's like, let's extrapolate from where we are now
Yes.
to
Where it's
where
going.
this will go if you don't
Yes.
change anything. And so,
Yes.
and I think I could be wrong, but I think we actually spend possibly the shortest amount of time with the Ghost of Christmas Present. I could be
Mm.
wrong. I'd have to
Yeah.
like look through page counts of the book, but we definitely spend a long time with Ghost of Christmas Past. We spend a fair amount of time with the Ghost of Christmas Future,
Mm.
and I do think it's probably a shorter amount of time
With the
with Ghost
present.
of Christmas Present. And
Fascinating.
but part of the reason for that is that when he is done, or when he's done with seeing all three ghosts, he wakes up again in the present, and he
Mm.
makes changes.
Yes.
So I would argue
Yes.
that Dickens, was following
He
your
followed
model
he
for the
follows my
most part.
protocol well
Yeah.
enough. uh which is great, and I think that's a perfect illustration of it. You change how you think about your past, you change the story, that the way that you're interpreting those events, which then change what you view as even possible for you in the future, and based on that future possibility is how you then choose to act in the present, and which is just like what Scrooge did here, which is just a beautiful, maybe a beautiful way to end this and wrap this up. I can't help but, again, extend an invitation to folks who are listening. Would love for you to have my, there's two different exercises related to doing an annual review. It's timely at the end of the year here. But also, if you want to do this kind of work with a group of other people, reach out to me about the accelerator. It's tentatively called Bootstrap Without Burnout, though Raj and I are going to keep workshopping that title in the future, and would love to have you a part of that early in 2023. Raj, this has been so fun, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface of this great story. I haven't watched the Muppets version with my kids. I feel like it's maybe been a little bit scary. It might be a little bit scary it's a kind of a scary story if you're not ready for it. Um, but I
Especially the
look
Ghost of
forward to
Christmas
sharing that.
Future. Yeah,
Yeah.
in that one can be a little scary.
Yeah.
I will say Dickens in the actual book, he says that he doesn't mean to put anyone in bad humor. Like he doesn't mean to
Nice.
be even though it's a ghost story, it's not supposed to be a scary ghost story. There are some, kind of tough scenes, but I'll bet your older
Yeah.
kids would deal well
Yeah.
with it.
They probably
So,
would.
yeah.
Well, this has been fun, Raj. Merry Christmas to you and to the listeners, and we'll catch you on the other side.
Likewise, Merry Christmas, Dan.
Thank you so much, Raj, again for another amazing and such a fun conversation. And thank you, listeners, for dialing in. I was gonna say it's like we're on a landline. Thanks for calling. I'm like an old talk show host. I mentioned this link to the annual review in the show, and I hadn't prepped it. That URL is taken. You can go to that URL. You'll find an old version of the annual review. The updated version that I was talking about here today will be available at themeaningmovement.com/review22. That's the word review 22. Themeaningmovement.com/review 22. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode, and I know I say this all the time, but it is the lifeblood of a podcast, it's our reviews. So if you're listening on Spotify, you're listening on Apple, you're listening on Amazon, or anywhere else where you can leave a rating and review, please take a moment and do so. That is how people find this show, and that is just so important to the growth of this show, how people like you can find this. If you're not on the email list, jump on the email list. I'm sending out updates weekly with all kinds of great content about new episodes that are coming out. I often asking questions where you get to dictate the future of what we're producing here. And so thank you in advance for being on the email list. You can find the email list at themeaningmovement.com. Jump into any of those boxes all around the site. If you're interested in building software, apps, web apps, mobile apps, or any other kind of software-based venture, reach out to me. I'm working with 923, and I love what we're building together. It is really fun. Our music is by Tom Roram. Our artwork is by Eleazar Ruiz. We'll be back with you in just a few days. Thanks so much.